All right, this lesson is about copyrights and licenses. This really is one of the biggest issues on the internet when we see restrictions being placed on our internet freedoms, or when we see people wanting to make laws that prohibit internet use. Most likely behind it is some sort of copyright issue. The music, movie, and software industry have a lot of lobbies and they pay a lot of money, and they want to try to protect their content. And so it's good that you know about this, because not only is it a big issue, but you could also end up on the wrong side of the courtroom. A copyright is a collection of rights that have been granted to the author of a piece of work. And this is intellectual work. So you wrote a book or a poem, you painted something, you sculpted something, you wrote some software, you made some music, took pictures, videos. If you invent something, that's a patent, that's a whole other thing. This is intellectual work. So since it's a collection of rights, what are some of those rights that you have? Well, by law, you are protected the right to copy it, obviously, right? You can sell it, alter it, lease it, or lend it. So the things you would expect as the owner of that work. So how do you get copyrighted material? Well, it's easy, right? As soon as your work is tangible, so some sort of form, it could be printed or saved, or like it's on the canvas, then it is automatically copyrighted. Now, that being said, if you want to put it out in the public, or if you want to try to make money with it, you may want to take the extra step of filing with a copyright office, because then it makes ownership easier to prove. You've got some documents saying that you copyrighted that work on a certain date, and so you have the government's help instead of hindrance. Piracy can sort of be thought of the opposite of copyright, right? Copyright is the protection. Piracy is trying to get around that protection. So illegally copying copyrighted material is called piracy. So for example, you download a song and your friends are like, oh, I want that too. So you make them some copies of it. Well, every copy you make is an illegal copy. It's a pirated copy. Now this top 10 list is a bit old, but you can just see sort of the amounts to get an idea. So these are the top 10 pirated TV shows. So Lost, almost 6 million download per episode. So that's 6 million pirated copies of each episode, instead of people buying it for $1.99 on iTunes or wherever. Some of them, why would anybody want to watch The Big Bang Theory? I don't know. So the consequences, what you have to keep in mind is that criminal charges may be levied against you, okay? So that would give you a felony record. It could also have jail time, although usually it consists of fines, and the fines go up to $250,000 per offense. One of the things that we're seeing more often is that the pressure is being put on the internet service providers to stop people. And so here's an example of Google Fiber, which is an ISP in some areas. They had been notified that one of their users was copying copyrighted material. They were pirating stuff. And so if you look, that Google is saying that we could terminate your service. So they could say, look, we are being held responsible. So if you're going to pirate things, we don't want you using our business. And they can tell when people are pirating, because one, there's very specific sites people go to, but also your traffic, your upload and download traffic, have a certain signature to it. And so ISPs really are in a position, because they see all of your traffic, to know who is doing it and who is not. All right, so if you don't want to do it illegally, then you got to know about licenses. A license is permission to use copyrighted material. Really, a license is permission, right? A driver's license is permission to drive. A marriage license is permission to get married. And this is the same thing. So somebody wants you to be able to use their things. Well, they're going to have a license, and that is your permission to use it. Oftentimes that costs money, but it doesn't have to. We've all signed these software license agreements, right? Every time we download an app and we agree to the terms of service, right? That is a license agreement, and they are legally binding. There are different types of licenses, a bunch of them, but for this class, really we're concerned with just a few. The first is public domain. Now, this really isn't protected by copyright law because one of three things has happened. So copyrights expire, so that might have happened. This is why, Romeo and Juliet, if your English teacher ran out of copies, they could just go make copies because there is no copyright on Shakespeare's work. Too old. Moby Dick, Sherlock Holmes, the Bible, all of these things. Classical music. So if the copyright expires, public domain, you can do whatever. Another way it could be public domain is the work was created with public money. This is rare, but sometimes, taxpayer money goes to create something, and so we all own it. So really, copyright doesn't work. And then the third is a creator can donate work into the public domain. So they could either leave it in their will, when I die, all of my poetry goes to public domain, or they can just donate it along the way. Photographers do this quite often. They have that perfect picture that they sell online for hundreds of dollars, but it took them like 200 pictures to get that. So what do they do with the other 199? Well, they could take some of them and put them in public domain so students and teachers can use them in school without worrying about copyright issues. So you can donate your work into public domain. All right, so no copyright protection for public domain. At the other end of the spectrum, though, is the all rights reserved. This is the one that is very restrictive, so it can only be used by purchaser according to the exact details spelled out in the license agreement. So you go to Best Buy to buy Microsoft Word, that is all rights reserved. You're allowed to use it only as the license agreement states. Most of the things you buy fall under this. So your English teacher, if you ran out of copies of Life of Pi, cannot go make copies of that. They would get in big trouble. They have to buy copies of that. All the video games that you're getting, most of them are going to be all rights reserved. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't have to cost money, right? So maybe you download Fortnite. That was free, but it's still all rights reserved. You can't go in and do whatever you want to it. You agreed to the license agreement. Now, we needed some common ground, some middle ground between public domain and all rights reserved. Because let's say you, as the creator of work, want to share it. Hey, I take pictures, but I don't mind if people use them online. Great. But if you put it in public domain, you don't really have any say over how people use it. If it's all rights reserved, then technically everyone who wants to use it needs to ask your permission, which might be a pain. So you can license it as Creative Commons. So Creative Commons helps make sharing easier, but also allows us to retain some control over how your work is used. So you would license it as Creative Commons, and then you would pick which of the 4 restrictions you think people should follow, and then you would attach those. So the first restriction you can place is called attribution. They have to give credit to the creator of the works. This is usually this is almost always part of Creative Commons. So they have to say, oh, by the way, so-and-so took this picture. All right, that's easy enough. Non-commercial is a restriction you can put on it. So they're not allowed to make money with your work. So you don't want your picture showing up in internet ads or on commercials. Well, put non-commercial there, and it cannot. No derivatives. This means that the work cannot be changed. So your image has to stay exactly the same as it was when you uploaded it. They're not allowed to Photoshop it. They're not allowed to edit it. It's got to stay the same. And then the last one is share alike. Means they have to use the same restrictions on their work as you had. So if you had non-commercial on yours and share alike, then they have to, if they in any of their work that they use your picture, they have to license that also with non-commercial and share alike. That way 3 people away don't get to use it commercially and you find your picture in ads or whatnot. It just keeps everyone using it the same. So that is copyright and licenses.